In 1928, Peruvian archaeologist Julio Tello descended into a hidden tomb in the Paracas Desert. Inside, by the light of his lantern, he encountered a sight that made him catch his breath. A cluster of human skulls resting in the earth, each unnaturally long and angular. These remains, dating back nearly 3,000 years, were unlike any ordinary human skull. Their crania swept backward in an elongated cone, towering high where a normal skull would gently curve. As Tello carefully lifted one skull, he saw that the bone had been molded into this bizarre shape, not by any geological pressure, but by human hands. The Paracas skulls, as they came to be known, were so extreme in form that early observers struggled to believe they were real. Even as wild speculation grew, the truth lurking in those graves would prove even more fascinating than fiction. Something deliberate had happened to these people, some ancient custom or ritual, and its purpose was a riddle waiting to be solved. The discovery at Paracas ignited a storm of questions. Why would an entire community of people alter their heads so drastically? Was this the mark of a strange genetic trait, or had these skulls been physically transformed during life? In the desert heat, Tello found over 300 skulls with this elongated profile, a massive graveyard of cone-headed ancestors. Each skull told the same story. At an early age, these individuals' heads must have been tightly bound or compressed, coaxed into growing tall and long. There was no evidence of illness or mutation to explain it. These were healthy humans who had been shaped like living clay. To the archaeologist brushing dust off bone, it felt as if they'd stumbled onto an ancient secret society, or perhaps even a non-human species. In the Paracas Peninsula, Tello's team uncovered not only the elongated skulls, but also rich artifacts, colourful textiles, intricate jewellery, and even hints of primitive surgery on some crania. This was clearly a sophisticated culture. Yet it was the skulls, grim and graceful in their strange elongation, that gripped the world's imagination. When news of the find spread, anthropologists around the globe debated their significance. Could it be that the Paracas people naturally had long skulls, a genetic quirk isolated to this desert tribe? Early examinations noted that the skull bones were thinned and stretched, not thicker or malformed as one might see in a medical disorder. This suggested an intentional shaping rather than any spontaneous mutation. Moreover, the uniformity of the elongation, almost every skull from Paracas was modified in this way, hinted at a deeply ingrained tradition. Skeptical researchers took careful measurements and confirmed what Tello already suspected in that first tomb. These elongated skulls were deliberately crafted, not born. The implications were astounding. As one researcher later remarked, unlike typical human skulls, these had a pronounced elongation, suggesting deliberate modification rather than a genetic anomaly. The desert burials revealed a practice known as intentional cranial deformation, and it wasn't confined to Paracas alone. What began as a mystery in a Peruvian desert was about to become a globe-spanning detective story, as archaeologists and historians found clues that this practice appeared in the most unexpected places and times. The elongated skulls of Paracas were just the opening chapter of a much larger tale. It seemed this wasn't an isolated quirk of one ancient culture at all, but rather part of a global phenomenon. In fact, the act of reshaping the human head has been practiced in far-flung corners of the world and across thousands of years. The Greek physician Hippocrates wrote in 400 BC of a people he called the macrocephali, literally the long heads, who believed those the most noble who have the longest heads and thus moulded their heads accordingly from an early age. Across the ocean in ancient Maya civilization, royal families practiced cranial deformation. The Maya believed such a profile evoked the countenance of their maize god, or a jaguar's proud visage, conferring beauty and status. Over time, scholars have come to see intentional head shaping as a form of language written on the body. Originally, head flattening may have been instituted to distinguish certain groups from others and to indicate social status. It was a badge of identity as much as any tattoo or costume. Many early civilizations lacked written emblems of rank, but an elongated skull was an unmistakable and lifelong marker. In some cultures, only the nobility had their heads bound, a permanent crown of flesh and bone. In others, entire communities adopted a signature style as a mark of their ethnic or tribal belonging. And in a few cases, as we shall see, the practice played a role in diplomacy and alliance, with shaped skulls becoming tokens of kinship between far-flung peoples. The more researchers looked, the more they realized that the elongated skull was a kind of passport across the ages, a visible link connecting mysterious burials in Peru, in Eurasia, and beyond. Yet, even as patterns emerged, mysteries remained. If so many cultures independently discovered head binding, what drove them to it? Was it purely aesthetic, an ancient fashion trend, or were deeper motivations at play? Some accounts hint at spiritual beliefs. Perhaps they thought a higher, longer head brought one closer to the realm of the gods, or allowed the soul more space. Others suggest practical or social reasons, to mark aristocracy, to instill group unity, or even to intimidate enemies by looking fearsome and inhuman. As we turn to one of history's most feared groups, the Huns, we find that head shaping could indeed be used as a psychological weapon and a symbol of power, in addition to its role as a mark of cultural identity. In the late 4th century AD, as the Roman Empire trembled under barbarian onslaughts, rumours spread of warriors from the east who looked like monsters on horseback. These were the Huns, a nomadic people sweeping in from the steppes of Central Asia, and their ferocity in battle was matched only by their startling physical appearance. Roman historians describe the Huns in odd and fearful tones. One such chronicler, Ammianus Marcellinus, called the Huns a race savage beyond all parallel. The Huns did not invent cranial binding. They inherited the custom from their ancestors and neighbours in Central Asia. Historical and archaeological evidence suggests that tribes like the Alans, Avars, and Sarmatians, who roamed the Caucasus and steppe lands, practiced head shaping long before the Huns thundered into Europe. In Bactria and Sogdiana, regions corresponding to parts of modern Central Asia, artists of the 1st centuries AD even portrayed nobles with elongated heads in sculpture and coin portraits. One notable example is the Alcon Huns, whose kings in the 5th century minted coins showing themselves with dramatically extended crania as a symbol of prestige. Clearly, to these warlike peoples, a long skull was a source of pride, a trait that distinguished nobility and leadership. As historian Cameron Petrie observes, the elongated skulls appearing on Alcon Hun coins replaced earlier crown motifs, suggesting the practice was deeply linked to their identity and even their right to rule. When the Huns pressed westward and came into contact with Germanic and other European peoples, they brought this cultural practice along, and it proved strangely contagious. By the 5th century AD, throughout the collapsing Roman world, local elites began to adopt artificial cranial deformation, apparently an imitation of the Huns or Alans. The barbarian mercenaries serving in Europe's armies set a trend that high-status families found compelling to follow. However, in these societies it appears the custom was often limited to women. Excavations in Hungary, Romania, and Germany have revealed noble women with elongated skulls, while men of the same communities typically did not show the trait. Perhaps the aesthetic of an elongated head was associated with female beauty, or high-born femininity in those circles, or perhaps women marrying into Hunnic clans adopted the style. One poignant discovery illustrates this cultural blending. In a 5th century Frankish cemetery in Alsace, France, archaeologists in 2013 uncovered the tomb of an aristocratic woman whose skull had been dramatically deformed, the forehead flattened and the back of the head pressed into a near cone. Her remains, 1,600 years old, looked so out of place among her more normally shaped contemporaries that one could forgive a passerby for thinking a visitor from another world had been buried there. Indeed, to an untrained eye, her skull might resemble the pop culture image of a grey alien. But this woman was no alien. She was likely a noble bride from the east, possibly an Alan or Hunnic princess sent west. Her highborn status is evident from grave goods, and her elongated skull marks her as someone who spent her childhood in a culture that prized the long head ideal. By finding her in France, archaeologists realized just how far the influence of cranial deformation had spread during the migration period of Europe. From the fringes of Asia to the heart of Gaul, the custom left its imprint on the bones of those caught in the great currents of history. The practice of head binding among the Huns and their European contemporaries was thus twofold in meaning. It was a symbol of tribal allegiance and heritage, and for those outside the group, it also had the effect of inspiring awe or fear. A Roman writer in Ammianus's time, trying to make sense of the Huns' sudden appearance, might have seen their bizarre skull shape as a mark of barbarism, or even punishment from the gods. The Huns' own motives are lost to time, as they left no written records. But their legacy lived on in the skeletons they and their imitators left behind. Those skeletons would, centuries later, pose a riddle to scientists. Why did so many tall, cone-headed women appear in otherwise typical European graveyards? To solve that, researchers would turn to cutting-edge science, extracting secrets from ancient DNA and revealing a saga of migration and marriage in early medieval Europe. These mysterious women came to be known by a haunting nickname, the Tower Skull Brides of Bavaria. For 1,500 years they lay undisturbed beneath the fields of Bavaria, skeletal remains of women whose skulls were elongated into extraordinary towering shapes. When these graves were first studied in the mid-20th century, German archaeologists were perplexed. Buried among ordinary early medieval villagers, the Bajuvari people of the 6th century AD, were a few women whose heads, in death, looked utterly alien. Their crania rose in peaked domes, far higher and narrower than those of the others. Local historians dubbed them Turmschädel, meaning tower skulls, and lurid speculation began to swirl. Some thought these women might be members of a distinct tribe that had wandered into Bavaria. Others mused about freakish genetic mutations. The more fanciful even wondered if legend or mythology could explain their presence. For decades, the Tower Skull women were a mystery. They had lived and died among the Bavarians, yet they didn't look Bavarian at all. It wasn't until recent years that advanced DNA analysis provided a definitive answer. The genetic results were as dramatic as the skull shapes. The women with elongated skulls were not biologically related to their Bavarian neighbours at all. While the ordinary Bavarian men and women showed genetic signatures of Central and Northern Europe, blue eyes, fair hair, ancestry tracing to Germanic and local populations, the elongated skull women's DNA pointed far to the southeast, to the distant lands of the Black Sea and the Balkans. In particular, their genes matched profiles from the region of modern Romania and Bulgaria, over 1,000 kilometers away. These women likely had darker eyes and hair, and an ancestry rooted in southeastern Europe, not Bavaria. In short, they were immigrants, transplanted into medieval Bavarian communities. Armed with this genetic evidence, historians could at last piece together a likely scenario. These long-headed women were almost certainly high-status brides imported from far-off lands, as part of strategic alliances. In the tumultuous post-Roman era, new kingdoms and tribal confederations were forming. Marriages were a diplomatic currency, used to seal treaties and secure loyalty. The women with elongated skulls, it appears, were exotic brides brought into Bavaria, perhaps given in marriage by their families from the eastern realms, where cranial deformation was common, to chieftains or noblemen in the west. Once in Bavaria, they lived out their lives, adopted local customs, and were buried as members of their new community. But their appearance set them apart in life and in death. As Dr. Vieramar explained, the data suggest Bavarian tribes were specifically acquiring exotic-looking women with elongated heads born elsewhere, likely to bolster alliances. It is a poignant image, a young woman, her skull already shaped in infancy in some distant village by the Danube, travelling weeks along rough roads to a new home among strangers. A living symbol of a pact between peoples. These brides carried their cultural identity literally on their heads, even as they assimilated into a foreign society. Beyond the tale of migration, the Bavarian finds also shed light on the practical aspects of cranial binding. Osteologists examining the skeletons noted that none of the women showed obvious signs of illness or malnutrition. Although their skull shape was dramatically altered, there is no indication that their privileged deformity caused them harm. As one anthropologist remarked, while severe deformation in some cases can lead to minor issues, like eye socket changes, these particular skulls were only moderately deformed and did not suffer from it. It's a reminder that for all its exotic appearance, head shaping, when done within certain bounds, was not a brutality but a controlled modification akin to tattooing or ear piercing, though on a much grander scale. The tower-skulled brides likely led otherwise normal lives as medieval noblewomen, managing households, bearing children, who, interestingly, were not given the same head shape in Bavaria, since the custom was not native there, and being laid to rest with respect and honour. Their legacy, uncovered by archaeologists and geneticists, is a fascinating chapter in how human culture can spread and adapt, carrying even bodily traditions across continents. While the West has yielded many of the most famous elongated skulls, the practice was by no means absent in the Far East. A startling discovery on a small Japanese island shows just how far the tradition of cranial modification extended. On the island of Tanegashima in southern Japan, a prehistoric community known as the Hirota people carried out cranial deformation as part of their way of life. For years, the flattened and shortened skulls found at the Hirota burial site puzzled researchers. When archaeologists first excavated the Hirota graves in 1957, they found hundreds of skeletons dating back to around the 3rd to 7th centuries AD. Many of these skulls were conspicuously flat at the back, as if compressed by a board. Initially, scientists were cautious. Was this the result of some natural cranial growth pattern unique to this isolated island population? Or could it be, yet again, intentional deformation? It took a fresh study decades later, employing modern imaging and statistical analysis, to confirm the truth. In 2023, a team led by biological anthropologist Dr. Noriko Seguchi analyzed the Hirota skulls with 3D scans, comparing their contours to those of other ancient Japanese populations. The differences were unmistakable. The Hirota skulls had a distinct morphology not seen in other groups like the contemporary Yayoi or Jomon people. In other words, the Hirota people, much like the Paracas or the Huns, had practiced intentional cranial modification. What motivated the Hirota to do this? Here, the researchers had to tease out subtle clues from the burial context. Both males and females had modified skulls, indicating it wasn't a gender-specific beauty standard. The practice also appeared widespread. Many of the individuals across age groups and social statuses showed the flattened head trait. The Hirota graves were not particularly lavish. They did not indicate a sharply stratified society. However, one standout feature of Hirota culture was their extensive shell trade. Over 44,000 shell ornaments were found in the burials, suggesting the Hirota were involved in a vibrant network of exchange with other islands and communities. Dr. Seguchi's team hypothesized that in such an environment, cranial deformation might have served as a marker of group identity, helping bind the community together in the face of ongoing exchange with outsiders. If a Hirota trader sailed to neighboring islands, their distinctive head shape would instantly signal their origin and cultural allegiance, possibly facilitating trust and familiarity in trade relationships. This interpretation resonates with the idea of identity and cohesion seen elsewhere. Just as a Paracas elongated skull might denote nobility, or a Hun's elongated head denote warrior heritage, the Hirota skull likely proclaimed, "I belong to the Hirota community." In a time of dynamic trade, where different groups intermingled, maintaining a clear group identity could be crucial. The Hirota case also dispels any notion that only large empires or renowned tribes engaged in head shaping. Even on a small island, a community with its own customs developed this complex practice and maintained it for centuries. It underscores how cranial modification arose independently in diverse settings, not from a single origin or diffusion alone, but as a recurring cultural solution to different social desires, be it beauty, identity, or status. From the windswept cemeteries of Peru to the barrows of Bavaria and the islands of Japan, one theme emerges with striking consistency. Elongated skulls are the product of human intention, not a separate breed of human. Over the years, fringe theories proliferated around these strange crania. Some speculated about lost humanoid species or even extraterrestrial visitors to explain why such skulls exist. Yet modern scientific analysis has firmly laid those theories to rest. While some have suggested extraterrestrial involvement or otherworldly origins, most archaeologists and anthropologists agree that these skulls are the result of deliberate cultural practices. In other words, there is nothing alien about them. They are fully human skulls, molded by human hands and human beliefs. Recent DNA analysis of 4 elongated skulls discovered in Peru has produced startling results that challenge established theories about ancient human migration to the Americas. The testing, conducted at Lakehead University in Canada and other laboratories, reveals European genetic markers in specimens dating back nearly 2,000 years, long before any known European contact with South America. The most compelling specimen is an 18 to 22-month-old infant from the ancient Paracas culture, discovered in an ornate tomb on Peru's coast. Radiocarbon dating places the child's death at approximately 1,950 years ago, while the elaborate funeral textiles indicate membership in a high-status family. What immediately caught researchers' attention was the presence of reddish blonde hair, a trait completely absent from Native American populations. When DNA samples were extracted during the careful unwrapping process overseen by archaeologists and forensic specialists, the results were unprecedented. The maternal lineage belonged to haplogroup U2E1, which is exclusively associated with Proto-Germanic and Proto-Balto-Slavic peoples of ancient Europe. Contamination was ruled out through rigorous testing protocols. The physical characteristics of the skull itself proved equally remarkable. When compared to a normal Native American infant skull of similar age, the Paracas specimen showed profound differences in both shape and size, suggesting possible genetic or cultural cranial modification practices among this ancient population. The second specimen originated from La Oroya, located in the highlands east of Lima, and was removed from Peru by an American physician during the 1930s, before government restrictions on archaeological exports. Dating to approximately 850 years ago, this skull underwent similar DNA analysis with equally surprising results. The genetic testing revealed haplogroup T2b in the maternal line, a marker found exclusively in European populations, particularly concentrated in the British Isles, Baltic states, and Scandinavia. This finding is particularly significant because it represents a completely different European lineage from the Paracas baby, suggesting multiple waves of ancient European migration to South America. The broader T2 haplogroup family is distributed throughout Europe and parts of the Middle East, but is entirely absent from East Asia, the presumed staging area for Native American migration via the Bering Land Bridge. The specific T2b variant's concentration in northwestern Europe raises intriguing questions about ancient maritime capabilities and transoceanic contact. The third skull, nicknamed Cleopatra by museum curator Juan Navarro due to its graceful cranial shape, represents another Paracas culture specimen housed in the local museum. Like the infant, this skull displays obvious red hair coloration, reinforcing the non-Native American characteristics of this population. Hair samples from this specimen yielded haplogroup H1, a genetic marker strongly associated with Western European populations. The highest concentrations of H1 are found among the Basque people, where it represents 27.8% of the population, along with significant presence throughout Iberia and parts of North Africa. Archaeological and genetic evidence suggests that H1 may have been the dominant haplogroup among European megalithic cultures, from approximately 5000 BC until around 2000 BC, when Proto-Celtic populations began expanding across Europe. This timeline raises the possibility that megalithic builders, potentially displaced by changing cultural dynamics, possessed the maritime technology and knowledge necessary to reach the Americas by sea. The final skull analysed was discovered in the same royal tomb as the Paracas infant, suggesting they were family members who died around the same time period, approximately 2000 years ago. This specimen's DNA revealed haplogroup H2A, a genetic marker with distinct geographical associations. H2A is primarily found in populations from Eastern Europe, some Western European regions, and most significantly the Caucasus area, including Crimea. The distribution pattern shows major concentrations around the Caspian Sea, northern Black Sea region, and Scandinavia, with genetic flow patterns suggesting origins in the Caspian Sea area, spreading through the Black Sea region. This finding is particularly intriguing because similar elongated skulls have been discovered across Europe, including specimens from France, Austria, Hungary, Germany, and England, all dating to approximately 2000 years ago. Archaeological evidence suggests these European examples may have originated from the Crimean region, where museum collections include similar elongated skulls dating to around 300 BC from the Sarmatian culture. The physical characteristics of these Peruvian skulls show remarkable similarities to European specimens from the same time period. Museums in Crimea house elongated skulls from around 300 BC that display nearly identical morphological features to the Paracas examples. Similarly, numerous elongated skulls discovered in Romania, situated on the western edge of the Black Sea, date to approximately 2000 years ago and may represent westward migration from the Crimean source region. The presence of red and reddish-blonde hair in multiple specimens provides additional physical evidence supporting the genetic findings. This hair coloration is entirely absent from pre-Columbian Native American populations, but is common among certain European groups, particularly those from northern and western regions. These DNA results fundamentally challenge the established model of human migration to the Americas. Traditional archaeological theory holds that all pre-Columbian American populations descended from Asian migrants who crossed the Bering Land Bridge and carried haplogroups A, B, C, D, and possibly X. The discovery of haplogroups U2, E1, T2b, H1, and H2a in ancient Peruvian remains suggests alternative migration routes and timelines. The genetic evidence points to at least two possible scenarios: either multiple independent maritime migrations from different European regions occurred over several centuries, or a single population with mixed European ancestry established communities in Peru and maintained genetic diversity over time. The geographical distribution of the source haplogroups, spanning from Scandinavia to the Caucasus, suggests extensive ancient maritime networks capable of long-distance ocean travel. The presence of European genetic markers in pre-Columbian Peru necessarily implies sophisticated maritime technology and navigation capabilities among ancient populations. The proposed migration routes would have required crossing either the Atlantic Ocean directly or following a longer path through the Indian Ocean and across the Pacific. Archaeological evidence from various European megalithic cultures demonstrates advanced astronomical knowledge and engineering capabilities that could have supported long-distance maritime ventures. The timing of these proposed migrations, occurring during periods of cultural transition in Europe, suggests that displaced populations may have had both the motivation and means to undertake such journeys. Contamination controls were implemented throughout the testing process, and the consistency of results across different specimens and laboratories strengthens the reliability of the findings. The research team included forensic specialists, archaeologists, and geneticists, who worked collaboratively to ensure proper sample collection, preservation, and analysis. Radiocarbon dating provided independent verification of the specimens' ages, confirming their pre-Columbian origins and ruling out post-contact European admixture. These findings necessitate a fundamental reassessment of pre-Columbian American history and the complexity of ancient human migration patterns. The discovery of European ancestry in Peru, combined with similar anomalous findings from other regions, suggests that the Americas may have been reached by multiple populations using different routes and technologies. The research also highlights the potential for discovering additional evidence of ancient transoceanic contact through systematic DNA analysis of museum collections and newly discovered remains. Many archaeological specimens collected over the past century have never undergone genetic testing, and these results demonstrate the value of applying modern scientific techniques to historical collections. The implications of these findings extend far beyond the specific specimens tested. Systematic genetic analysis of elongated skull collections from museums worldwide could reveal additional patterns of ancient migration and contact. Similarly, expanded testing of remains from other South American archaeological sites may uncover evidence of European presence in different regions and time periods. Investigation of potential landing sites along the South American coast could provide archaeological evidence of ancient maritime contact. The sophisticated burial practices and high-status grave goods associated with these European ancestry individuals suggest they may have held positions of authority or religious significance in their communities, potentially leaving additional archaeological traces. The research also opens questions about the cultural and technological exchanges that may have occurred between European and Native American populations in pre-Columbian times. As research continues and additional specimens undergo analysis, our understanding of ancient human migration, maritime capabilities, and cultural contact may require substantial revision.